Back here in the U.S. and what could be a pivotal week for millions of Americans waiting for word on President Biden's student loan forgiveness plan. The Supreme Court will hear arguments in two key legal challenges that could undermine the administration's efforts to relieve student debt.
Yes, that's right. The importance of this case, it really cannot be underscored. And that's in part because it reaches so many marginalized lives who would benefit from having their student loans vanquished. All right, so this from the Washington Post. So Tuesday's oral argument, well, they bring together a string of combustible issues. An ambitious program aimed at fulfilling a campaign promise for Biden's political base, heightened suspicion by the Supreme Court's conservative supermajority about the ability of federal agencies to act without specific congressional authorization, and the power of Republican-led states to use the judiciary to stop a president's priorities before they even take effect. Now, Republican leaders have long expressed their opposition to forgiving student loan debt. Michael T. Hilgers, well, that is Nebraska's attorney general, and he wrote the following in a brief that was filed on behalf of his state and 5 other GOP-led states. Canceling hundreds of billions of dollars in student loans through a decree that extends to nearly all borrowers is a breathtaking assertion of power. Yeah, breathtaking is interesting because I'd say the same thing about the reach of those PPP loans that were not really paid off. But hey, those are just my thoughts. We also know that Education Secretary Miguel Cardona has pushed back against the assertion from these GOP-led states that forgiving student loan debt is an abuse of power. This also for the Washington Post. Cardona says the administration has the authority to forgive student loan debt under the Higher Education Relief Opportunities for Students Act of 2003. It allows the secretary to waive or modify loan provisions in response to a national emergency. In this case, the coronavirus pandemic. Now, Cardona proposed a plan that would eliminate up to $10,000 of student debt for borrowers earning up to $125,000 annually or up to $250,000 for married couples. Those who received Pell Grants, a form of financial aid for low and middle income students, are eligible for an additional $10,000 in forgiveness. About 20 million borrowers could see their balances wiped clean. That is huge. There are so many people out there that really could benefit from them, from having the student loans wiped away. Let's talk about those people. Student loan debt forgiveness, well, it would benefit more than 40% of borrowers could have their student debt wiped out entirely. Most of the student debt relief will flow to lower income Americans. About 8 in 10 Black student borrowers may qualify for $20,000 of forgiveness. And borrowers with low debt, no degree, will get a clean slate. That is huge. Before we jump to the Supreme Court, Rayyvana, I wanna get your thoughts because when I just think of how much of a burden that this is going to take off of the shoulders of society's generally most marginalized of groups, I would really advocate for this, and I would hope that the rest of the nation would as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm someone who would be receiving the $20,000 forgiveness. I was a Pell Grant recipient. An undergrad, I have a lot of student loan debt because of law school. This would change my life. Having $20,000 of my student loans forgiven would change my life. And for most of the people who would be receiving it, it would change theirs as well. So the level at which the Republicans are having this conversation, pretending that we're forgiving the debt of people who went to medical school and are now, very high salary doctors or lawyers, it's just not true, particularly coming from like the law school side of things. I want to practice public interest law. I'm not going to be an attorney who's making even a 6-figure salary. And I think that having these student loan burdens push a lot of people out of going into those careers where they're, in public service, where they're helping people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford to get that kind of help. So the ramifications of having the student debt are massive. I will also say that it's really disappointing that Biden hasn't taken a firmer stance on this, because one of the lawsuits, which I'm sure we'll be about to get into, is from a woman who's suing because she doesn't qualify for student loan forgiveness. So all he would have to do to make that case moot would be to forgive all student loan debt, period. That immediately, there's no more lawsuits. There's already tepid standing in these cases regardless, but she would have no basis to sue at all if he did that. So if he would just come out stronger on these issues, then we could, at least get to the heart of them.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, having that conservative majority on the Supreme Court really puts Biden in the position where the administration is facing an uphill battle. This also for the Post. But the administration's track record at the court, fortified in recent years with justices nominated by President Donald Trump, who are more conservative than their successors, is not encouraging for the president. Many experts believe the administration's best chance in the student loan plan is to convince the court that neither the Republican-led states nor two individuals in a separate case from Texas have legal standing to challenge the initiative. Such a conclusion would relieve the court of having to rule on the merits of the case. Absolutely, if you can get it out on procedural grounds, that would be huge and so incredibly easy. Because as Rayyvana had mentioned, at least one of the people, it's a matter of them saying, well, they don't qualify. And because you have to have standing, a legitimate cause of action to actually have an action in a case, if the government can prove that these individuals don't have one, that would be wonderful. Rayyvana.
I would like to imagine a world where the Supreme Court, cares and demonstrates a level of care towards procedural, the procedure in and of itself, but standing particularly seems to have just gone out of the window with this conservative majority. And what we have is 6 of the 9 justices who are bought and sold by the Federalist Society, who are going to make decisions, essentially based on what the Federalist Society's agenda is. And it's really disappointing because, they have so much power in this country. And I think a lot of times when we're discussing politics, not at TYT, but out in the world, people forget to talk about how crucial the judiciary is to even what Congress is able to do, what the president is able to do, and the constraints they put on the progress we're able to make. I always refer to them to our 9 unelected wizards because there are very little checks and balances on the judiciary. So I think that they'll make a decision. However, their ideology dictates they want to make this decision. Ideally, I would like to see them throw these cases out for standing because they don't have that. And it's necessary to bring a case. But I'm gonna keep my expectations low because the Supreme Court has not demonstrated to me that they have a level of care for the rule of law.
No, they haven't shown us that in any form or fashion. They definitely seem to like to maintain the status quo in terms of ensuring that certain groups stay with the government's knee on their neck, so to speak. It's the fact that a lot of these GOP-led states are fighting against having student loans forgiven because they know that it would help bolster those who are in the lower classes, who are struggling economically, predominantly those Black and brown people out there. And so these GOP-led states, they do not want to see that happen. We have a capitalistic society and a racist society and a sexist society, and they prefer to maintain the hierarchies in the position they are in, which is why when anybody steps out of line and dares to rise above, they will go the extra distance to try to push you down, to beat you down. And so this potential opportunity to have our student loans forgiven, to give us that little extra leg up so we have greater access to opportunities, is not something that the right is willing to allow for. So I assume that they are going to continue to push to fight. And I just wonder when the Supreme Court's conservative bench is actually truly going to sink its teeth into this. And it may be in this particular instance, but let's hope not.